Good evening, everyone. I'm Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Truro University. And welcome to the FOLCS Conversation Series, coming to you live from the FOLCS studios. Tonight, sports betting unplugged. In 2018, the Supreme Court struck down state laws that prevented statewide gambling on sports. And sure enough, it didn't take very long. Nearly the entire country, nearly 40 states and the District of Columbia offer sports betting. That's exactly what those commercials mean for FanDuel and DraftKings. And sure enough, most of the entire country, Sin City, simply all of a sudden went mobile. And it went mobile for sports. We've got two perfect guests here. We've got Jonathan Cohen, who basically wrote the book on the subject. He's written the book, Losing Big. There's a good way to start off a book. Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. So you kind of get a sense of where Jonathan Cohen is coming from, and we'll talk with him. And we have another phenomenal guest. Oh, I should point out, Jonathan Cohen is also affiliated with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And then Todd Fuhrman. Todd Fuhrman, you may see on CBS Sports. He's a gaming analyst. He's really great at it. He also has a podcast, Bet the Board. That's a nice name. And prior to that, he was a financial analyst for Caesars Entertainment. So he's the guy, you know, representing the casinos in some ways and the gaming industry. If you have questions for our friends, Todd and John, you can leave it at the Q&A box on the bottom of the homepage for FOLCS Studio. We're about ready to begin. So let me just start off by saying that isn't this in some ways inevitable that something like this would have happened? You're talking about perhaps, and I don't know, both of you given this more thought than I have, that gaming is part of our nature. You don't see animals in nature playing poker. This is something that human beings do and have always done. And secondly, we're sports obsessed. It's a perfect storm. You're talking about something that is natural to humanity and something that everyone is interested in ways that you might not say, is true of gambling. Sports is already within our purview and our interest. And so isn't this in some way something we should have anticipated? And why is it that we didn't get here? Is it simply because there have been scandalous moments of sports and gambling that stopped it? And if it wasn't for the Black Sox scandal, we would have been doing this all along?
Look, I think sports gambling was inevitable in the proliferation across states. You referenced 2018 and the repeal of PASPA. I've lived in Nevada since basically graduating from college back in 2005. So sports betting has more or less been in my DNA, even probably before it should have been at a young age in terms of overall exposure. But I think the illusion of control is what attracts people, specifically young men, to sports betting, maybe more than any other activity that's out there. It's the tribal nature, it's that inflamed passion, and the fact that they think they know more than the odds maker does, and they have an ability to outrun the math, whether it's men or women of any age. I think that's what always drives people to sports betting in one capacity. It gives them a vehicle to have a little bit of skin in their game around some of their favorite teams.
So if you watch Martin Scorsese's movie Casino, which I'm sure you've both seen, and then there's a moment there.
Yeah.
there's a moment.
That's a lot more exciting, guys, than what my life is day to day, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the world that Todd Fuhrman comes from, ladies and gentlemen. He hangs out with Joe Pesci all the time. What I remember something about that film was that I think that is based on a real person who ran that casino, that he sort of created the idea. He was always a sports odds maker, but he created the idea of bringing the sports book to casinos. So that has been around, right? Betting on sports outside of the world of bookies, right? In an open atmosphere of casinos, that was legal, right? But that was only legal in a few states. There was never anything mobile about that. I couldn't be sitting in Miami, Florida, and somehow called a casino in Vegas and said, I want to bet on the Dolphins, right? It only was legal there because the casinos decided it was another profit stream, and they made it legal, and they created these lavish little sports books. But again, it had to be localized. It was never able to be mobile.
Well,
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, even in Las Vegas until the 1980s, sportsbooks were basically a loss leader. It was sort of a way to get folks in the casino to get to play the slots or to play blackjack. It was not sort of a prominent part of the business. And you picked an auspicious example because there probably were a lot of mobsters in Miami who were calling Vegas trying to get money down.
Hey, John, I'm from Miami. I know exactly.
And maybe you were one
about.
of them. I don't know. But I would say, just to your initial question, this idea of inevitability. There's a difference between, yes, lots of people have always liked to gamble and lots of people have always liked sports. And we're going to let 18-year-olds open up an app on their phone and bet $3,500 on, tonight's baseball game or whatever the case may be. So the inevitability argument, I think it sort of feeds on itself. It's by claiming that gambling is inevitable, we sort of make it inevitable. And it's not inevitable that it is frictionless and available in sort of every way and to everyone. And it's only by claiming that it's we're hardwired for it that let's create the policies that create. So
you're saying
frictionless
this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
Now, so in your book, John, you point out sort of this begins with Colorado. Apparently, at some point, states that never thought they should do this found religion, and they said, "Oh my God, there's a gigantic revenue stream here. We could pay for water in Colorado and things that they thank God there's something called sports and gambling." So that's literally what happened, right? That Colorado and other states figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just to broaden from sports betting. This has always been the calculus: is that lawmakers have always seen gambling writ large as a pot of free revenue. There aren't a lot of sources for government revenue that don't require compulsory taxes. Going back to the 1930s, 4 states legalized slot machines because of a revenue crunch during the Great Depression. And then during COVID in particular, states, had a lot of money going out the door in relief payments, high rates of unemployment. And it seemed like, let's just tack on sports betting as a new source of revenue.
So explain to us, what is the difference? Again, I grew up in Miami. Parimutuel betting, I mean, when I was a kid, there was betting on highlight, dogs, and horses. So there was betting. It was going on. What is it that seemed less sinful? To explain what's less sinful about parimutuel that Florida discovered it sooner.
I'll broaden it again, because we sort of the trajectory of legalized American gambling in most states starts with the lottery, starting in New Hampshire.
That's right, of course, the lotteries.
Yeah, and then bingo games, church bingo games started legalizing in 1957 in New York, and so that's sort of the acculturation. And I think the lotteries, which happens to be the subject of my previous book, but I think it's actually sort of the best analog here because that was the first spread of gambling sort of out into the streets, if you will. There wasn't sort of a dedicated place where you go and play the lottery. It's at your convenience store. It's at your gas station. So that, I think, was the acculturation of sort of gambling into the American cultural bloodstream. And then, but as Todd well knows, and maybe he could speak better to this, there's sort of a tripwire that you cross, because the lottery is just a lottery. But sports betting, affects the sports leagues and affects sports. And that's where I think maybe it's a bridge too far and why it took an extra 60 years to become legal.
But if you read the Jonathan Cohen book, you also walk away. Again, I read the sports book. I didn't read the lotteries book, and I will. But one thing I don't think is in the lotteries book is the pathology, because you make a very strong case that there is a public health crisis involved in gambling. And in that way, the analogy doesn't really work. Because have we heard stories of suicide or financial ruin from lotteries? It may be absurd that people think they'll become billionaires, but it doesn't have the quote, as you point out, the word action. It just simply doesn't provide the action that you get in a casino. Let me just ask about I assume the pandemic helped, right?
Yeah, I mean, American sports came back so quickly relative to the rest of society. Yeah,
and not just American sports came back, but at the point of time that we had the pandemic, there was, because I think I saw commercials for FanDuel and DraftKings. In other words, it gave people more stuff to do. It wasn't just Netflix. All of a sudden, you can get an app and you can bet on professional sports or college sports, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, Jonathan, feel free to add anything here. I mean, when you look at what the pandemic did, I think more than anything, it exposed people that were looking for a vehicle to try and channel their entertainment dollars into sports that we wouldn't have ever considered betting. And as a result, you had some of the biggest national books offering odds on the kind of activities that they would have scoffed at if you had told them 18 months prior that, you know what's going to be big for you? Table tennis played halfway across the globe, or that you need to make sure that you can offer a multitude of betting markets on Belarusian Premier League soccer. So all of the countries that didn't have some of the stringent COVID policies that we had here or in other spots in North America that had sports going on in any capacity, networks were clamoring for the content. And as a result, bettors that were bored stiff sitting at home trying to figure out something to do were putting down $5 or $10. And you looked at the gaming figures coming out of specifically Colorado, and they were head scratching in terms of the overall volume being bet on a sport and an event that you would have laughed about years prior, even if you went from campus to campus across the country to try and convince 21-year-old kids or older that, hey, look, you're going to be betting on table tennis 9 months from now and be taken seriously in any capacity.
So what happened, John?
I'll just say in Colorado, just to put a point on top, to put a cherry on top of Todd's Sunday, people are still betting $12 to $14 million a month on table tennis in Colorado every month.
Well, one of the things you point out in your book is that if you, because of mobility, there's action all over the world on anything. There's all sorts of things to bet on. So you don't need to wait for Monday Night Football. If you want to bet, you have a phone. You have a lot of different ways to do it. But the question I have is when it comes to sports, I'm older than you two. I come from a generation that, we knew what the term of art, say it ain't so, Joe, meant, right? Shoeless Joe Jackson, you don't have to see Field of Dreams to know that, right? Or I think John Sayles made a film called 8 Men Out, right? I mean, we remember these stories. They become part of the American mythology of sports and honor and integrity. In the 1950s, there was the college point shaving scandals with basketball teams. Frankly, almost all of them here in New York City. All the local schools were very good in basketball. Manhattan College, CCNY, I think, won the NIT, right? It's sort of extraordinary. I think we were a basketball powerhouse and we discovered that we were cheating. And so there was this era of integrity. And of course, the most famous, I think, of all is, Paul Giamatti, who, by the way, has been a FOLCS guest twice. He's been on our show twice. Paul's dad, Bart, is the guy that banned Pete Rose for life when he became commissioner of baseball. So obviously, we used to take this very seriously. And then what happened? Is it just money? I thought the whole idea was that integrity in the sports was exactly what the league thought was most essential. Is it that they just, casinos and app makers dangled too much money in front of sports leagues and said, you've got to be an idiot not to take this?
Well, I think it's always about money. I mean, anyone who's sitting here listening to us go back and forth, we'd be sugarcoating it and lying to the audience if we said it was anything other than that. When the NFL, Major League Baseball, what have you, look around and they see these advertising dollars that are available, first on the DFS side and then into legalized sports betting, and they were going to go, you know what? We're not going to forego an incremental revenue stream that's right there for the taking. But the one area that I'll push back is on the integrity front, because I do think legalized sports betting provides a better vehicle to try and sniff out some of the nefarious elements that take place in sports betting. Through my life, I mean, some of the sports betting scandals that stand out, what unfolded with Benny Silliman at Arizona State, and how some of those numbers moved and ASU students got wind of what was transpiring in such droves that they would flock to Vegas, and I believe at the Mirage, that they were moving some of these games 10, 12, 13 points on college basketball Tuesday nights that allowed the gaming control board to go, something's not right here. We need to sort that thing out. Whereas a situation like what we saw with Scooter McDougal, a former running back at Toledo, that all took place away from the transparency and the disinfectant, so to speak, of legalized sports betting. Whereas we enter the era that we're in now, and the unfortunate reality, we do have situations around the Cleveland Guardians pitchers, Emmanuel Clase and Luis Garcia, Jonte Porter that Jonathan wrote about in the book and what transpired there. So I think somewhere along the way, legalized sports betting is great to make sure that we have a regulated oversight body, that level of communication taking place between the NCAA and major sports leagues. But at the same time, you begin to bang your head into a brick wall when you're offering some of these micro markets and some of these other betting avenues that are a little bit easier to manipulate for folks that are looking to try and take advantage that may not necessarily implicate the final score.
We'll come back to that, because that sounds that even you, Todd, might say, hey, there could be some regulatory influences here that would not be terrible. And in fact, it could improve the whole betting experience if you just didn't have the multiplicity of options and just, had some. John, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I 90% agree with Todd. I think my problem is when the leagues claim that it's about integrity as if they weren't already monitoring the illegal market, and it's only by bringing it above board that they can monitor it, when they, of
Right.
course, have been doing this for forever, and
Well,
they don't just come out and say this is about money, which is what it's actually about, and they claim
Right.
that it's about integrity.
Well, one thing I learned in your book, John, is that what legalized gambling does is it's much better for your kneecaps because you don't have bookies knocking out your
Can't
knees.
bet on
That's
credit.
true.
Yeah.
But you made another point that I did not consider before, and I don't know what Todd would say to that. It's really shitty on your marriages and your tax returns, because if you're betting illegally, the government doesn't know what you're doing, and it's possible that no one else could know. There's anonymity, and also I learned bookies extend credit in a way that casinos don't and FanDuel won't. You know, a bookie's going to say, all right, I won't knock your knees cap out today, but you want to bet some more and see where you're going. Now, again, you would only say that only feeds the pathology. Let's talk about that pathology, because you make a very strong case, and I want Todd to respond to this. Again, you talk about very extreme examples of people who have really destroyed their lives. And to your credit, John, you spent some time with them. You knew these people. You read this book and you go, oh my God, Jonathan Cohen knew these people. He watched this unfold in front of him. So if you follow the tobacco industry, we learned that nicotine is the kick that makes it addictive. And so we started to learn during these tobacco lawsuits that they were not innocent. And I'm wondering, what is the analog in sports betting? Is it the phone? Is it I don't bet, so I don't understand what it means, these promotional credits that they give you free money to bet on, and it only ties you in. In other words, is that the nicotine? Is the nicotine the phone, or is it that the sports books and the FanDuel and DraftKings gives you stuff to incent? It's like in a casino, this must happen to Todd all the time, but you walk around and there's like a Sharon Stone. By the way, Sharon Stone has been a guest at FOLCS. You guys are sitting in great chairs. There's a Sharon Stone running around and, you know, plying you with drinks and standing by you to give you luck. And the idea is to make you keep gambling. So the idea is, what is the kicker here in the mobile world that created the same thing? Because I know that if you go to Las Vegas, the more you lose, the better hotel room they give you, the better tickets they give you to something else, because they want to keep you betting. How do they do it here?
Yeah, I would say the comp here for so what makes online sports betting sort of particularly addictive and uniquely addictive, right? I don't want to belabor the metaphor, but generally speaking, it's just a lack of friction, right? It's the ability that you can.
That's right. That's in your book.
Yeah, that you can on your phone just upload money, gamble it right away, lose, upload more money, gamble it right away, bet on the seventh point in the third game of the Czech Pro-Am table tennis tournament at 3 a.m. because you're addicted to gambling. And when you're addicted to gambling, you're not addicted to winning, you're not addicted to money, you're just addicted to action. And it's the dopamine from the uncertainty from the action. So again, there are lots of things, as you laid out, Thane, that are sort of similar, that are actually people treat as weird about modern sports betting. That's actually sort of a tried and true practice of the casino industry that people sort of don't bat an eye at anymore. But then there are other things that are new and different, and they think they particularly center around the fact that it's available on your phone 24 hours a day.
So if there is this dopamine sugar rush, this addictive quality that is what feeds into this, what's perhaps natural in our species, I think this is the point you were trying to make before. Yeah, the casinos or the sports books tell you that or even the leagues tell you they're into integrity, but in the end, you know, they're really into the money. And the reason I'm asking this is because, you know, what could be done for prevention and for treatment, right? If a person knew they had an addictive personality, one question I have is, do people with addictive personalities, are they more predisposed to get the dopamine rush out of sports betting than they are to go to a poker table? In other words, is there something endemic to this kind of betting, the way this action is created, that hooks people in who are already ready to get addicted to something, but this is just too irresistible? Do you think
Jonathan, I'll give you the first word on this, and then I have some thoughts, guys, because look, I'm not going to sit here and defend some of the practices we see in earnest from a lot of the national sports books that are out there. I think a lot of the behaviors that go on in under the guise, or not even under the guise, for profit and overall greed for the books are a lot different than the environments that I was subjected to when I first broke into the industry, trying to figure things out in the casino side, especially on the sports betting vehicle. To Jonathan's point a little bit earlier, when I was behind the counter at Caesars as an odds maker, sports betting on our best years at Caesars Palace, the iconic sports book in the center of the strip, represented 5% of our gross gaming revenue. It was the slot machines, it was the tables, it was everything else under the sun where sports betting provided the amenity. It's a much different element now when you can do it in the anonymity of home. You can continue to play on your mobile app. And to Jonathan's point, when you have these expanded offerings, the fun doesn't stop when Monday Night Football is over. You can find sporting events around the world, and you don't have to know the teams. You don't have to know the players. Hell, you don't even have to know the rules to try and get that action and that dopamine drop that a lot of these action junkies are after. And I think that's where you try and find the balancing act between what kind of offerings that you want to provide for your players, at the same time making sure that, look, they're not going to get themselves into trouble. And I don't think we've struck the perfect balance, and I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to do so.
So the term of art, degenerate gambler, which we've heard before as a term of art, that didn't really apply in Vegas to sports books because it was such a small piece of the business?
No, we still have degenerate gamblers. I'm not going to say anything to the contrary. I mean, we'd have guys that would come in that I would see every Saturday and Sunday throughout the course of football season. And look, they were betting denominations that might seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things for the business we were doing at Caesars, kind of paled in comparison. But you could see their demeanor and their disposition change based on the wins and losses that they were accumulating over the course of the weekend. But that's the hard part that we found ourselves in when I'm a sportsbook supervisor. It's not my job to tell people that are coming up to the window to try and place their bets, hey, look, have you talked to your wife? Have you gotten approval to try and place these particular bets? And that's the challenges that therein existed. The difference between that environment and what's out there now, once we closed the sports book at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, there was nothing else for people to bet. They couldn't go to the kiosk. They couldn't bet Malaysian ping pong. They at least had a de facto cooling off period that they could come back at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning and try and chase their college football losses with the NFL. But I'm not condoning that. It's just a different environment.
Yeah, you're analogizing to binge eating, right? It's like people that get up in the middle of the night and they're looking for donuts. People that get up in the middle of the night, they grab their phone and they're starting to gamble.
100%.
That is available through your iPhone or your mobile device. And that is really what's happening. But in a casino, at some point, it shuts down. John, you make a very strong case that prevention would be good, treatment would even be better. But whose job is that? I'm listening to you guys and I'm going, it's not the sports leagues, although they're benefiting from it. Is it the state who's collecting the revenue stream? Or are they saying, we're not going to act against interest? We love gambling. We don't want to prevent anything and we don't want any treatment. Is it the sports books themselves? Or they should say, you know what? We're really not like bookies. We take it seriously, like Todd Fuhrman said. It's better to be out in the open. And so therefore we take some responsibility. We try to undertake whatever we can to help our customers and so that they can bet more safely and healthily. Whose job?
It's lots of people's jobs, and this is America, so everyone, of course, has personal responsibility and bears personal responsibility for their own decisions. I'm just going to flip the formulation that you offered. I think at the moment, it is all about treatment and not about prevention, and it should be the opposite. If you want to be sort of conspiratorial, you would say the industry loves treatment language because that means the person's already lost all their money. And now we can, sure, we'll get you to a GA meeting. We'll get you to the hotline, but conveniently, you've already lost your house. What I would like to sort of flip that on its head, right, and focus more upstream, create a system by which someone can legally bet, maybe even legally bet a lot of money, but there's some of this friction in place such that they can't bet, lose their bet, get mad, deposit more money, get mad, deposit more money, and so on. And sort of the snowball of addiction and the dopamine sort of shuffling of their brain begins. And that's where I think we can focus on the treatment, on the prevention with, to your point, either self-imposed limits from the sports books, cutting off players who are under the age of 25, which the FanDuel's parent company has in place in the United Kingdom and Ireland, for example. There are special rules if you're under 25 as to how much you can bet and how many bets you can place in a month. Or the state could do it for them. And if sort of so be it. But I don't want to be some big nanny state liberal that says, oh, Congress has to come in, the state has to come in. I would love to see the industry self-police, but from the history of tobacco, the history of alcohol, it doesn't seem like it's likely going to happen.
The problem is that we have with the internet anyway, is that they collect data on us, right? You go to visit a sports book at, Caesars, and, there might be some, guy in the back that's watching you, what you do.
His name is Todd Fuhrman, yeah.
Yeah, there's a guy like Todd that's going.
Book to faces is what we used to call it back in the day. Knew exactly who the players were when they walked in and knew how much I had to respect their opinions when they bet into our numbers.
Oh, I love that. What it's called, book their faces?
Book to faces, because
faces.
And not to get into the granular nature, every dollar in the sports book, as Jonathan knows, is not created equally. $1,000 bet from one player can have significant impact, whereas a $100,000 player from an individual whose opinion you don't respect doesn't even make a blip on the radar.
But the internet companies are really in that way in the same as a Google search or social media, because they can track you. They know exactly what you're doing, and they have much better accuracy than just someone standing around and knowing their faces, that you actually know when they bet and what they bet on and when they're most vulnerable to bet.
This is most frustrating to me about sort of the current setup we're in, because if Todd Fuhrman of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, could have the data that modern sports betting companies had, he would be the richest man in Nevada. Like the amount of data they must have on every single person ever, it's incredible. And they partner the ability, for example, just hypothetically, to know when your paycheck is getting deposited and to send you a promotional offer, to see if you haven't bet in a couple days and if you've been exhibiting unhealthy play and you haven't bet, all of a sudden you get a reminder offer. And Fanatic, and I'm not just sort of going on speculation here, if an executive from Fanatics has presented this data at the Sloan Sports Conference last year or the year before, and there are all these indications of when someone might be exhibiting unsafe play, but there's no proof that we have that it's the responsible gaming teams, so-called, at the companies that are using this data. That data could very well be used by the VIP teams, or the teams whose job it is to inculcate bigger play from bigger whales. And we just don't know. And the data they have is such a black box and is so powerful and so dangerous.
So, Todd, John said something, after all, this is America. So I said, well, Todd, I'm going to ask Todd a question about This Is America. I'm sure your position is, and a lot of people who say, look, America is all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Personal autonomy and human perfectibility is what our country's about. Ask Thomas Jefferson. He would totally say, look, this is what I meant by the pursuit of happiness. Whatever it is I'm pursuing, don't bother me. I'm pursuing it unless it's something that the state or the government thinks this is something. If it's a vice, it's a vice, but it's my vice. It's not your vice. And so I wonder, I was thinking about this the other day. If anyone's ever, I'm starting to notice this at my age. You watch television, it seems like America only drinks beer, eats pizza, eats chicken sandwiches, hot dogs, right? Not hot dogs, hamburgers. Like and of course now we have sort of sports betting, and
we sign up for car insurance. That's the other
right.
thing.
So but all of the first 7-8 things I just gave you leads to obesity. This is exactly what RFK Jr. is talking about, right? About making America safe again, right? And a lot of people are saying, yeah, but that's my pizza. I can eat it. And what is it about this that's different? It's also people that are obese and can't stop eating. They are also addicted. They're suffering addiction. And guess what? That is in many ways, arguably, a much worse public health crisis. That's exactly what RFK Jr. is trying to say, that we're all paying for these addictions in one way or the other, but we don't speak of it in the same way. We would never say to someone's personal autonomy, you better drop 100 pounds or that's it. Whereas here we say, we're going to cut you off. We're just going to cut you off and make you, or Todd, are you saying, no, I actually do think cutting people off is the right thing if you see a problem?
No, I do. I'm all for cutting people off that haven't demonstrated an ability to maintain a level of self-control, because I've been around it. Look, I was betting games at a way too early age through illicit channels. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. Back in the day, I would go to Western Union. I would send money to Curacao to be able to bet offshore as a 16 or 17-year-old kid. And I was chasing the action. I was doing the homework, and it eventually launched my career. So it probably puts me in the minority of it being a catalyst to try and make things happen. But I do think there are problems with what goes on. And I think the sports books, have a huge badge that they need to try and wear and do a better job. I mean, you look at the products that are being advertised. You mentioned pizza, you mentioned beer, and some of the other items that'll help, basically plump up your waistline. Look at what the ads are focusing on for sports books now. They're higher hold products that the recreational bettor, even if you're betting $5 or $10, is never going to have a chance to beat. It's the single game parlays. I mean, you listen to some of these publicly traded companies claiming that they're going to do 14 to 15% hold over the course of a financial quarter. And while I don't want to try and use industry vernacular, that means if every dollar wagered, their expectation is that they're going to take 15 cents to their bottom line. To put things in perspective, before you had single game parlays, before you had some of the frictionless transactions that took place on your mobile phones, I would have done backflips as a sportsbook operator if we were taking 6 cents on the dollar because the player at least had a little bit of a puncher's chance. Jonathan mentions a little bit of the black box and everything that goes into it. Try and ask someone on the street to explain the math that goes into a single game parlay. They don't have the slightest inkling of what's going on behind the scenes. And in my opinion, that is a bigger culprit of some of the things that are going on than anything else. And to kind of bring it full circle to the casino, look, I was running numbers for the casinos. We were trying to figure out how to build a better mousetrap, how we could create better table game utilization on the floor, how we could raise limits based on occupancy and hour of the day, what our slot holds need to be. And there's a cautionary tale, something that a lot of people won't get to. Back in 2007, we had a prominent businessman, and I wish I was making this number up, lose about $130 million to us over the course of about 2 years. He basically sold his Oriental Trading Company back then, and he gambled most of it away. It was embroiled in lawsuits. But I think when you're looking at it, so much of the casino's bottom line, whether it's tables, slots, or sports, is that VIP clientele that Jonathan did a phenomenal job outlining in his book, saying that is a small percentage that really pads the bottom line for a lot of these sportsbook operators.
Well, that's what I want to get to now, John. Here's something I was very surprised to learn, which is that unlike what we talked about, America's health crisis and obesity and certain public health issues that arise from eating the kinds of food that we're being told every night and all day on TV commercials we should be eating. But most people that are using these mobile services are just having fun with it. They're not addicted. That's what I think is strange. Now, what is it? Is it because they don't have addictive personalities? Is it because they're not chasing parlays in what Todd is sort of making us think is, because they know how to package stuff to make it cool, make the bet look even more interesting. And so the question is, why is it that most people can just deal with it like just getting a sandwich and not having to eat 5 sandwiches? Yeah. They just have enough to eat. What is it here? And if it isn't everyone, what is the percentage of people that are in trouble? Because then what? And if that's the case, why aren't they easy to identify? We know who they are. The vast majority of people are fine. It's just some people, and even by the algorithm alone, we could find them.
Okay, so I'm just going to take the next 6 hours to try to unwrap that. If that's okay. Just to put some specific numbers on what Todd laid out, estimates are from last NFL season, 60% of bettors accounted for 1% of sportsbook revenue, and 82% of the revenue came from just 3% of players.
That's impossible.
Some of the, no,
that's insane.
All it takes is one numbers. It takes one Phil Mickelson to sort of put their thumb on the scale and bet $100 million or whatever. But then there's a lot of people like the guys I profile in my book who, lose $330,000 that they can barely afford, and that's all it takes.
That's incredible.
So, okay, so to a couple of your points. So the food analogy sort of breaks down a little bit because gambling is addictive and eating is not addictive. And you're right, not every single person who gambles gets addicted, as is sort of obviously the case. But I would say it is sort of similar because gambling is formally addictive, as codified by the American Psychiatric Association. It's sort of more comparable to drugs or alcohol or tobacco, where in the same way you'll get lots of people who use those products who might not develop an addiction, but due to whether it's neurological, sociological, cultural, political factors, whatever the case may be, some will. And I'll say, I don't want to really compare sports gambling to opioids, but even at the height of the opioid crisis, it was only estimates of 3 to 12% of opioid users who were developing addictions. And so it's not like every single person who hurt their shoulder and got prescribed an OxyContin got an addiction, but there's still so many people who were using them that it sort of amounted to a crisis. And I think that's sort of the mass number of users that we have is sort of pointing us in the same direction.
So right, so you're saying there is I think in your book you point out there is a DSM code for
Yes.
gambling, right?
The only
And
behavioral addiction codified as such. Todd,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I don't want to compare what you do every day to taking opioids, but I think
No. Look,
health issue,
I think there are definitely concerns that you raise, and it's a valid discussion to try and have because, if it's 95% of the population that can handle themselves in a responsible manner, but there are 5% that can do significant harm, not only to them themselves and everybody in their ecosystem, it's problematic. And it's something that I think all of us need to look at. And I think the operators should bear a little bit more responsibility. I think the AGA should own some of the things. And your comments from Bill Miller, who downplays the addictive component of betting, which is laughable to me. But you look at the way that we're heading and not just sports betting. The thing that scares me more than anything else is iGaming. I mean, the ability to play slots and table games from the confines of home on your mobile phone. I mean, that gets ratcheted up even that much faster than betting on, will the first pitch of an inning be a ball or strike? And I think as we continue to head down some of these channels, there's no doubt there need to be guardrails and precautions put in place, because once you've gone too far and we've already taken the lid off Pandora's box, you're not getting the lid back on, and it almost becomes damage control above all else. And I think even the leagues are starting to understand some of this because they're seeing some of the atmospheres created through social media and around some of their athletes for bettors that just can't handle the behavior and are deciding to lash out, use death threats or a variety of other tools, making it about somebody else more so than accepting responsibility for their choices, and more often than not, some of the poor choices they made.
But there is a seemingly a difference between gambling, sports gambling, and say cigarettes or alcohol, which you saying, well, they're all addictions. There are dram shop laws which essentially say to bartenders, if someone is plastered and you keep giving them drinks and they go off in their car and you don't take their keys away and they kill someone, there's personal liability there.
There's no.
But the question is what's the analog for that for gambling?
There is none. There is none.
There is none. So I'm just saying it's a little different. That's why I said to Todd earlier, I said, I know that Todd feels strongly about personal autonomy because there is a different argument. Even cigarettes. Guess what? I just realized in talking to you, when I grew up, there were cigarette ads on television. That stopped. We can't. So yes, you can get Burger King and Wendy's, all that. But when I was a kid, you saw a lot about the Marlboro Man and Lucky Strike cigarettes. And so there was a lot of that, but we decided not to do that. Why? Because we discovered that cigarettes cause cancer, but we don't believe that gambling causes cancer. So is it really about the outcome determinative nature of this? That it's just not the kind of thing that freaks us out in the same thing. If some 24-year-old kid, there's one kid that's like a young associate at a law firm, and it's really, unfortunately, I'm a law professor, so I watched that and was cringing the whole time. Don't do it. Don't stop stop that. That we see it just differently because we have less sympathy because there's no cancer and there's no vehicular manslaughter.
I think what you're talking about is actually sort of the other piece that we haven't talked about on the solution side yet, which is sort of a cultural destigmatization and education effort, right? We have not yet. It was only really through the opioid crisis, for example, that drug addiction was destigmatized. We were willing to say, hey, it's not your fault. The Sackler family plied your doctor in rural West Virginia with a bunch of pills and they got you hooked and so on. And I think we haven't yet had that kind of sort of cultural reckoning, cultural conversation around gambling addiction. I will say, just by way of analog, that conversation is currently happening in the United Kingdom. The government has a six-part report or six recommendations to sort of address the suicide crisis in the country, and fixing gambling laws is one of those six issues because of the wave of suicides among young men.
So suicide, not financial ruin.
Right. Gambling addiction is the addiction most tightly correlated to suicide, more so than drug or alcohol addiction. And but you're right. That's sort of the most sort of dramatic manifestation of gambling addiction.
Yeah, it's the closest you get to cancer.
Yeah,
but it just seems different than when the guy's driving the car from the bar and runs over a family of four.
But Todd already alluded to this. Like, if I steal my grandmother's purse or whatever to use her money to gamble, that's sort of the equivalent of hitting her with my car when I'm drunk, because she's now been affected by my addiction. By
right. I've now ruined her life.
Yeah.
What about the players, Todd?
In terms of the individual athletes or the players?
Several things. Why aren't the players participating in the revenue stream? If they sell a jersey with my number on it and my name on it, I get some money. If I have actually increased, you keep using the words, John, it improves fan engagement. I don't even understand that at all. That to me makes no sense at all. In fact, I would have thought it's the exact opposite, because if I'm betting, then all of a sudden my regional team, I don't care about them so much. If they're losing me money, I'm mad at them. I'm not a diehard Packer fan anymore because I'm losing a fortune. And that was the whole point, that you develop these regional loyalties. Secondly, I thought engagement meant you go to a game and you're hanging out with your buddies and you're jumping all over each other, high-fiving each other. But what you described seems dramatically not interesting. People like staring at their screens in isolation in the dark. It's like the illusion of the social network, that it's really a network. There's nothing really about social about it. You're not really standing next to somebody. It's the same thing. It seems like very isolating and not engaging, but you're pretty sure everyone seems to believe that this gets people more excited. Well, if I'm a player, I'm saying, I have just increased the value of your franchise. I've just given you a whole new revenue stream, and I'm not getting any because of something that the Black Sox did in 1919.
Well, I think you're seeing an uptick, though, in the franchise valuations that you mentioned, but also the media deals that come along with it. I mean, these contracts are about as lucrative as they've ever been, and we've seen the kind of financial situations it's created for some of the biggest media partners that are out there. And as the collective bargaining agreements continue to go through ongoing negotiations based on when they're set to expire, I think the players' unions and all of the sports should be looking to try and negotiate a larger piece, or making sure that there are safeguards put in place for some of the individuals that are subjected to it. But in terms of engagement, I think you can paint with broad strokes there. And it doesn't necessarily mean engagement with one another, but engagement with the game itself. And some of the media numbers don't lie, that players that are going to bet on these games are watching more and more of these games on a week in, week out basis. And football probably is the primary driver. You look at the betting handle that's out there for the National Football League. That is why you build the church for Easter Sunday. It's why Red Zone has grown in popularity. It's why YouTube can now charge upwards of $500 for out-of-market games. And while the NFL used to hide behind, people just want to watch their favorite fantasy players, they knew full well while people were paying top dollar to make sure they could get out-of-market games. I mean, I won't claim to be an old man by any stretch of the imagination, but I remember growing up as a 7, 8-year-old kid in the Chicago suburbs where you got one game. When the Bears were playing in the 12 o'clock Central time slot and they were at home, you had one game. And then based on blackout restrictions, you hoped that the Bears were on the road because you might get 2 games later in the day. And there was no way to try and get other football games to try and watch. Now you can pretty much watch every college football game, every NFL game, hockey game, whatever you may have, and it creates that level of engagement. And sportsbooks are going to continue to ramp up their offerings to get people to try and watch 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, or in some case, stay tuned into a sporting event they might not have cared about for a full 90 minutes if they have a little bit of skin in the game.
Todd, I love that anecdote because you reminded me of my childhood in Miami, because before the Dolphins started winning Super Bowls, they couldn't sell out the Orange Bowl. They couldn't sell out the Orange Bowl. There was nothing on Sunday. You literally have to, go get a radio. You couldn't watch it on television because there were blackouts.
It was those large satellite dishes that my dad had to explain to me as a 9-year-old. Hey, look, you're not old enough to go to the sports bar, so you're stuck at home watching the Bears finish the season 3-13 against the Detroit Lions, who were 2-14, and want to gouge my eyes out for the better part of 3.5 hours.
So, John, do you agree that overall, that I hadn't even thought about this, that betting has increased the valuation of the franchises? It's not just the TV contracts. It's this other level of a revenue stream that just didn't exist before. And if that revenue stream now is increased, enhanced the value of the contracts, that means that the players are essentially getting a piece of it because they're getting a piece of a larger pie.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, also, I'll just throw in the pile sort of additional whole new crop of advertisers, sort of in vein of, pharmaceutical companies or car companies and hamburger companies and so on. But I'll just sort of to move this to where I think where this is going. Unfortunately, I think it's sort of a bit of short-term thinking on the part from the leagues. It feels like a bit of a Faustian bargain because exactly as Todd said, in the short term, you pump up your revenue numbers, you pump up your viewership numbers, which were on the decline, and now you, as a result, get your media rights deals up and so on. But you're not creating a generation of sports fans. All you're doing is creating a generation of gamblers who don't actually have the sort of what I have, at least, or I had, which is the underlying love of the sport and the team that gets me into gambling. And I'm willing to gamble on my favorite teams because I have a favorite team or a favorite player. But all you're doing with 18-year-olds, 21-year-olds is you're teaching them to view sports as another way to make money or as another way to test their knowledge against their friends. And they don't have the underlying love of the game that is going to sort of carry them through if they develop an addiction or they lose more money than they can afford, or they get mad, or there's a betting scandal that costs them money or something. What happens? I think they're just going to fall off the face of the earth, and you're sort of risking not even creating a new generation of sports fans at all.
So you're saying it's a whole new level of fandom. They're not fanatics necessarily of the sport. They're just fanatics of betting on the sport.
Right. They might as well be betting on Malaysian ping pong. They would do that if that was what was on at the 7:00 time slot.
Yeah, but again, people don't. I mean, I don't know. I guess ESPN covers professional poker leagues, right? The games that take place in Las Vegas or elsewhere. But I think that's what I said before about the perfect storm, because you have the gambling, the allure of gambling combined with the obsession of sports. It's just irresistible. Whereas most people, yes, the addict who's looking for a ping pong game, that's one thing. But if in fact it does create more interest in football, I tend to agree with you. I think it's an interesting point. It's a different kind of a fan. You think it's not as pure a fan. Todd would go, he's just the same fan. He just still loves the game, he loves it even more, that he's got some. Now, I guess you both agree that players should never be permitted to gamble, even on not their own sport. In other words, why couldn't Pete Rose bet on football? He never comes close to betting on baseball. Why not make a ban on your own sport? I mean, Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley, I mean, I don't know, Todd probably feeded them in Vegas. He probably had dinner with them. Those guys like to gamble. And so we always looked weird at them. Like, why is Michael Jordan betting on every putt when he plays golf? Why can't he just play golf like a normal person? And I think that it obviously didn't affect his popularity. But there is a question about that. They're saying, well, why shouldn't he be able to bet on a putt? He's not a golfer. What's the difference? He's not even playing anymore. Why should it bother us so much? It seemingly does. It seems to taint the image.
Well, for me, look, if a player's done and his career's over, quite frankly, I don't care if he's betting on sports in any capacity to try and do that. Now, I'll take a slightly different stance that I know some of the leagues and even the NCAA is kicking around the idea of college athletes being able to bet on professional sports, which quite frankly, I think is a terrible idea. And this coming from somebody who was an NCAA athlete who did bet on professional sports when he was actually participating at a Division III level. But I think what it does is it creates a dangerous imbalance in terms of what some of these players are doing and what they may do to potentially get themselves out of debt should they get themselves in trouble. Because take, for example, I'm a quarterback of a smaller college program that's out there, and I've been betting the NFL all weekend. I may have lost money that I don't have from my NIL deals, whether it's $1,000, $2,000, the number's irrelevant. Someone knows that I've lost that money and I don't have any way to pay it back. Well, what happens? What's the next logical step in that progression? Well, you know what? You're the starting quarterback for insert blank university here. It'd be great if you guys are 24.5-point favorites this weekend. You make sure you only win the game by 14 to 17 points. So I think there are a lot of ways that we have to be careful and cognizant of what's going on. And I'm not sure it may necessarily happen at the professional level, but I do think it's a little bit odd that where there's smoke, there's fire, that you have two pitchers that have been incriminated, so to speak, from the Cleveland Guardians that were involved in this kind of thing, tipping off pitches for markets where you can't actually move substantial amounts of money, which begs the question, who may or may not have owed money to, and why are they doing some of these things to jeopardize their career, especially in the case of Emmanuel Clase, who was making $4 million a year. It made no sense to go out there and intentionally throw balls to start an inning for a betting market that maybe, if you're a VIP customer at some of the biggest books, you can bet $1,000 max on. So it begs the question, what else is going on behind the scenes? And for me, that's always the biggest concern, that you only see what's above the water. You don't necessarily see how big that iceberg is below sea level.
John, what is it that the 10 states or a little more who are holding out? First of all, will they all hold it? Will all 10 of them hold out? Who are they? What is it about that state that's different? What is it that they see that the others don't see? I mean, they're now a significant minority. The state legislatures are probably, some of their colleagues are looking at it and say, we're a bunch of idiots. We have a whole revenue stream of taxes that are available to us, and instead we're knocking ourselves out. We don't. By the way, I'm curious: are those 10 completely? They don't even do lotteries. They don't do anything.
There are only 2 states that have no legalized gambling whatsoever.
Of any kind.
Of any kind. Those are Hawaii and Utah. And Utah, as long as my 3-year-old his grandchildren are alive, they're not going to have any legalized gambling.
I agree with you there, Jonathan. 100% agree with you there.
But and then
what do the Hawaiians know that we don't know?
Well, Hawaii actually came very close earlier this year to legalizing sports gambling, which was caught everyone by surprise. That this is gonna be your first toe in the water. You're gonna just jump in with a full cannonball. You're not gonna wade in with a lottery first.
You mean they didn't do bingo?
Exactly. They were just gonna go right for the jugular with sports betting, but they pulled back at the last minute. But I would say, just for the other states, it's a lot of sort of internal state dynamics. Minnesota, South Carolina, Georgia have floated a couple bills, but the 2 that everyone's waiting for are Texas and California. And the size of the market is effectively going to double if and when those 2 states come on board and legalize sports gambling, because they're obviously the 2 most populous states. California, there's a lot of politics related to the tribal nations there that are trying to sort of make sure that they're involved in the process. In Texas, for whatever reason, the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, has made it a partisan issue, and they've claimed that sports betting is only by Democrats, and the Republicans don't like it, even though in most other states it's the Republicans. I don't know how that happened, but welcome to life in 2025, I guess.
The only people that root for the Cowboys, root for Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech are all Democrats. So those people clearly want no part of betting football on Saturdays or Sundays.
Also, that's an example of when people say in Texas football is a religion. That's what this means.
Well, and then I'm not going to throw this log on the fire with 7 minutes left in our conversation.
Throw it.
But there is this sort of gray market or backdoor loophole that Todd knows where I'm going with this, of prediction markets, where these 2 companies that are, again, under the guise of prediction markets, under the guise of betting options, of contracts that are claimed to be regulated by the Commodities Future Trading Commission, and therefore not subject to state gambling laws, are effectively currently offering what amounts to sports betting in all 50 states, including in Utah and Hawaii. And so it's not as big yet as sort of big money sports betting. You don't see the sort of ads and so on, and league integration in the same way. But effectively, if someone wants to bet, even legally, on sports, on the NFL, place one of Todd's hated parlays, they could do it tonight, or they could do it Thursday night on the NFL through this backdoor market of prediction markets.
And that would work if you're a Texan or a Californian.
Somehow I became the bad guy here, saying the parlays are bad. I'm cast aside, and Jonathan's taking hot shots at me over this. And I'm trying to be but he's exactly right. And I think that is where things start to get a little bit scarier than anything else, because we've had a financial brokerage enter that sports prediction market as well, and it becomes one of the largest retail trading platforms. It scares me half to death that you have 21 and 22-year-olds who have put their money to work for them, making investments in the stock market, and they go Friday afternoon when the market's closed. You know what? Maybe I can double what money's in my portfolio by betting college and pro football. And I think anytime we're blending those lines, that's as scary a proposition to me as anything else.
What's a safer investment than Patrick Mahomes as a home underdog on a Sunday? I mean, come on.
You may have that. If the market moves the right way this weekend, you may have that rare opportunity again with them catching one against the Eagles.
I'm counting on it.
Is there any state that's doing it right from your point of view, John?
I would say there's 2 states that are doing it better, but I actually think, the beauty of American federalism is that we can have 50 sort of concurrent state experiments. But fundamentally, of the 30 states, 30 NDC that have online sports betting, functionally, they're all basically doing the same thing. There isn't a state that's experimenting with this state has deposit limits, this state has an affordability check. They're basically all offering the same product. The only difference would be Ohio and Massachusetts, which seem to be the state regulatory bodies that are most interested in actually regulating sports gambling. Massachusetts is sort of holding the feet to the fire of these companies a little bit for this practice they have of cutting off winning bettors. This promise in the advertising that you can win, and then of course when you do start winning, they cut you off. So Massachusetts is the only state that's actually sort of looking into this and seeing whether this is a fair game. But as for an average customer who's not going to be affected by that, fundamentally their product isn't that different from Florida or anywhere else.
So, there was a time, certainly after the stock market crash of the 1930s, where people used to say, and this is the New Deal, well, stock market is the only form of legalized gambling, right? We heard that term of art. That was very common. And so Franklin Roosevelt picked up on that and said, aha, then we should get federal regulation. And that's where we got the SEC, and we got the Securities and Exchange Act, and all sorts of incredibly arcane and complicated rules, and put a lot of lawyers in business and bankers for regulatory. There's nothing to stop the federal government, congressional leaders reading the Jonathan Cohen book and saying, oh my God, this is a real problem. 40 states, except for Utah, 48 states conceivably could be doing this soon. And so therefore we could have, like we have the FDA and the SEC, do you imagine more of a regulatory climate in our future, either of you?
Well, I mean, the prediction markets are interesting because if people are poking around and try and see who happens to be investors and or on the boards for the two largest prediction markets that are out there, I would say federal legislation probably isn't coming anytime soon because it paves the way for these prediction markets to gain a stronger foothold, not only in the states that have some form of legalized sports betting, but also get into the Texases, the Californias of the world. Look, trying to get anything done these days on a federal level seems to be a bit of a fool's errand. So I'm not optimistic that sports gambling is going to be at the top of anyone's list. I do think, though, from sports betting in general, did come under a little bit of scrutiny when you looked at the taxation practice that was put into place with the big, beautiful bill and how it impacted a lot of my constituents and some of the folks that bet sports for a living to almost provide a deterrent for anybody who declares themselves a professional bettor. All that, in my opinion, looked to do was steer some of that money offshore and underground, doing the exact opposite that we're trying to do with legalizing sports betting, create that transparency, and collect some of those tax dollars that can be used for public services and create a little bit of the greater good.
That's how you started off this conversation, saying, here are the multiple benefits that come from making it legal, that it doesn't go underground. Let's take two questions from the audience, and then we'll say goodnight. This was awesome, guys. You really terrific. First question, great discussion. I'm wondering about the impact on athletes as fans bet in an increasingly granular way on what they are doing each game. Do you think, I guess the implication here is that this is having a psychological impact on the players? That they're, in addition to lifting weights and whatever else they're doing, this is freaking them out. That they understand that this is, people are betting on whether the next pitch is a ball or a strike. For God's sakes, it's hard enough to throw a strike. That how many touchdowns I'll score this particular game. I already have my agents yelling at me all the time. Now I know that my cousin is betting on how many touchdowns I get. Do we know of anyone who's saying, I'm a nervous wreck from this gambling. I hate this stuff.
I think we've seen some players kind of push back, and some of them embrace it and joke with a little bit of candor about, hey, look, if I slide down on the 1 yard line, I know my fantasy owners are going to be unhappy with my performance. And those that understand that comes with the privilege that it is to be a professional athlete, I can understand. Do I think the people that take to social media to berate people or share personal information or attack family members or comport themselves in such a way? No, absolutely not. It should be a zero tolerance policy for that. And if the leagues can find a way to root out that particular element and keep those people away from stadiums and players, more power to them. What's interesting, and I think maybe a little bit more of a hot button issue, and Jonathan, if you have strong opinions, it'd be great to hear your perspective, is the college sports props. And the idea that people think that some of these college athletes can be insulated and protected if we eliminate that. And on the flip side of it, there is a school of thought, I'm not saying I fall into either camp, that go, wait, all of a sudden these college athletes that have been trying to clamor for $3, $4, $5 million NIL deals want to claim that they're amateur athletes and they shouldn't be subjected to the same level of scrutiny as the professional counterparts. I don't know what the right answer is, but I do think states that find ways to keep certain props off the board or eliminate the ability to bet your in-state schools. Like if you're living in Illinois, who are you kidding that people that want to bet on an Illinois or Northwestern football game on a Saturday aren't going to find a way to do it if they can't do it through regulated operators? But I do think the college player prop market is interesting and fascinating, and I'm not sure there's a simple solution in any capacity.
But does the NIL situation, though, reduces the idea of purity? It basically says,
Right. It takes away
all
that
of a sudden
amateur
we're in
status.
another world now.
Yep.
You know, when Carson Beck made $5 or $6 million and apparently his Lamborghini was stolen. That is just not what normally happens to a senior in college.
It only used to happen out here in the desert in the early 1990s when UNLV was winning national championships in college basketball. So
Exactly. All right, one more question. We'll say goodnight. I like this one. How do you expect the growth in online sports betting to be impacted by an economic recession? So this person is obviously an economist and is predicting the financial markets and where we're headed. Historically, how has that played out? 2008, did Vegas get harmed, for instance?
Vegas got slammed in 2008,
Yep.
as Todd will know. But I think this is where we actually don't know yet about sports betting, about online sports betting, and sort of which category it falls into. And I'll give an analog just back to the beginning of our conversation. Studies are that when recessions come, when unemployment rates go up, when incomes go down, lottery play goes up, but other forms of gambling goes down. And so this is where I think, again, we're going to find out, because Todd is referring to these parlays, for example, which is basically turning sports betting into lottery tickets. So I think if we do hit a recession, we're going to find out, are these young men who are gambling, $1 to win $100,000, whatever, again, turning a sports bet into a lottery ticket, are they treating it like a lottery ticket, in fact, in a way that they are going to sort of only become more attuned to sports betting when the economy goes bad? Or are they really treating this like a trip to Vegas, like a trip to the racetrack, in which case we would expect their spend to go down when the economy tanks?
Yeah, real quick on that. My gut is that you don't see their spend goes down. If anything, you may see it tick up for just the reason that Jonathan outlined. People treating these single game parlays as an avenue to newfound wealth, as foolhardy and errant as it is. And what I think you'll see happening is that guys that would typically go out to bars to hang out with their friends may not want to spend $15 on a cocktail or $20 in a Vegas sports book or in a bar somewhere in Manhattan. They'll buy beers from the corner bodega. They'll have their buddies over and they'll spend that money that they would have on expensive cocktails to be around people, dating and flirting, all on sports betting. And that's going to be their vehicle to entertainment instead.
John, what Todd just said before, he just reminded me in your book, one of the things that you showed about the several people that had real trouble is that when they got hot, they couldn't be talked out of that this is their next step towards being wealthy people.
Well,
When they finally got hot, before they got cold again, they were sure that this was going to set them up for life.
Young men are famous for being rational and cold and calculating, especially when it comes to sports, especially when it comes to money, especially when it comes to their phone. And what could possibly go wrong combining all of these things onto a single app?
All right. This was enormously entertaining. You guys are incredibly charming and fun. I hope you'll come back again. And you definitely made us smarter about something that I think most people didn't know anything about this. I didn't. It's been a big eye opener.
Well, I was hoping for some tips for this weekend, but I'll call.
You had anything?
The bottom line is, Jonathan, when I was in front of the California State Assembly and they were asking about legalization, that was the last question they asked me, is who I thought was going to win. As it related to the San Francisco 49ers, I conveniently made sure I danced between the raindrops, and I feel I should be here as well. But what I will do for the viewers, because I know Jonathan will be too humble, I do encourage everyone to go pick up his book if they enjoyed the content here. I think it's a fascinating read and a perspective on it that provides, a very even-handed look at exactly what sports betting can bring to the table and some of the pitfalls that are associated with it. So I'm not going to sit here and clamor for people to go plunk down their paychecks every Friday at their local bingo hall or anything else. But there's a safe and responsible way to do it. And remember that if you're going to bet sports, only bet sports with money that you can afford to lose, because for 99% of people, it should be an entertainment vehicle above all else. Otherwise, you'll end up like me, chained to the desk, and be thankful every day that you have an understanding wife that understands what it takes to make money in this profession.
Well, the thing about Jonathan's book, and thank you for the plug for his book because it deserves it. What's interesting about it is that it balances his deep appreciation for sports. It's not as if he has a problem with sports. He understands why this is so important in our culture, but he also wants us to be made aware of these cautionary tales, because I don't think most people are aware of this at all. In fact, he mentioned the opioid crisis. That's something that is pretty well known now, right? That everyone believes. There's been shows, there's been books, everyone know who the Sacklers are. But this is something that I think if you don't read Losing Big, you don't get a sense of how endemic this is and the culture with some people that have really, truly ruined their lives. Guys, that was great. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Until
Thanks,
next time,
everybody.
Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS. Good night, everybody.